Okay. Got it. We have the Ramah and the Marshal. Briefly, the Ramah is Rabbi Moshe Isserles. Good. And his dates are 1530 to 1572. So how old was he when he died? Born in 1530, died in 1572.
42.
42. Did not live that long. Died on Lag BaOmer. Yet he is one of the most influential Ashkenazi poskim. To this day, Ashkenazi Jews who are looking to find out what Ashkenazi halakha is, they will follow the rulings of the Ramah by and large. And not surprisingly, he got smicha when he was 13. He attended the yeshiva of Rabbi Shalom Shachner, who was one of the founding rabbis of Polish Talmudism and an inventor of the pilpul method. Of course, the young Moshe Isserles married Golda, the Rosh Yeshiva's daughter. That's how it happens, okay, in the world of the yeshivas. And at 19, he was appointed Rosh Yeshiva and Dayan of the Bet Din of Krakow, which was a major city. The yeshiva was in Lublin, but he left Lublin and he went to Krakow. Now, his yeshiva was very interesting. In addition to Gemara, Halakha, Poskim, the Ramah taught astronomy, philosophy, mathematics, and Kabbalah. In fact, you probably don't know this, although Jean, you may. Does the name George Feuerbach mean anything to you? Theoricae Novae Planetarum.
It's a commentary from Ptolemy.
He wrote a book making astronomy in his period, which was the 15th century, okay? He wrote the most accessible and readable work on astronomy ever, okay? He was an amazing teacher. He loved the subject, and his book became every man's guide to astronomy. And a Hebrew translation was done by a certain Ephraim Mizrahi. It was called Mahalach HaKochavim, the path of the stars. And the Ramah wrote a commentary on this book. Okay, the commentary is unpublished, it's in the Bodleian, but he taught it in the Shiva. Astronomy was taught. Ramah said you can only understand Hilchot Kiddush HaChodesh and Yibur Shana, the Jewish calendar, if you know astronomy. So, and the times and everything that we do, including Shmuli the Molad, okay? Die Moiled wird sein, Montag in der Früh, 7 Stunden, 12 Minuten und 3 Chalokim, okay? But we need astronomy to do all this. And he taught philosophy, including the Moreh Nevukhim. So, remarkable. Okay, very few people know, of course, that he wrote this commentary on the on Feuerbach's Theorica Novae Planetarum. But they were different times and different people. He was very young. He was 19 when he became the Rosh Yeshiva and the third Dayan on the Bet Din of Krakow, together with Rav Moshe Landa and Rabbi Yosef Katz. But he was a very, very modest and unassuming man. Most people fell in love with him, okay? He was such a fine, nice, and very humble in all his dealings. Yet at 19, he was an Av Bet Din in Krakow, and he wrote some interesting stuff. We know him for the Mapa, which is the Ashkenazic comments on the Shulchan Aruch. Every Shulchan Aruch you pick up today is printed with the text of Rabbi Yosef Karo and the editions of the Ramah, Hagaot HaRamah. Now, it isn't only Ashkenazi traditions that he wanted to put in. He also had a different method. Rabbi Karo was backward looking. Rabbi Karo decided halakha on the basis of the greats. His three opening greats were Rambam, Rif, and Rosh. If they agreed, that was the halakha. Rabbi Moshe Isserles adopted a totally different principle called Hilchata Kebatra'eh, which means what? The halakha is like the last halachic authority in the line. So he was much more dynamic, much less classical. So the difference between Rabbi Yosef Karo and the Ramah isn't only in Sfard versus Ashkenaz, it's also how you think about halakha. Who should have the last word? Do you go back to the greats, or do you look at the most recent authoritative halachis and follow them? But that's to do with Jewish law and halakha, so we'll press on with the philosophical aspect. Actually, he was an amazing comeback artist because his two books, I mean, he wrote Torah HaChatat and Darchei Moshe, they were both superseded by Rabbi Yosef Karo. First thing that he wanted to write was a commentary on the Bet Yosef, and he wrote it. But before he could publish it, Rabbi Yosef Karo's on the Torah, I mean, the Bet Yosef appears, and all his work apparently is in vain. So he shortens it and puts it in the form of short notes. He also wanted to take the conclusions of the Bet Yosef and make them shorter. But Karo again stepped in first with the Shulchan Aruch. So what the Ramah did is he wrote again shorter comments, and that's called the Darchei Moshe. So he managed to pick himself up after every step back in the literary sense, and we have him today as the major Ashkenazi posek. He wrote a book called Torat HaOlah, which is on the inner meanings of the Bet HaMikdash, the utensils, and the korbanot. There's a lot of Kabbalah there. He was a Kabbalist as well as being a philosopher, astronomer, and a mathematician, an outstanding posek, an outstanding dayan, and his shul, of course, the Ramah shul exists in Krakow to this day. Anybody seen it? Jack, you have to unmute.
Yes, I saw it. Many.
Okay. And what did you think?
I think it was very, very interesting. The whole Krakow is interesting in that sense.
It is. But the Ramah shul, I mean, dates from the 16th century. It was built with money left by the Ramah's mother. Now, his father, Rabbi Israel Isserles, was very, very, very wealthy. He was also extremely learned. And so he put the money together, and they built the shul. And remarkably, the shul has survived to the present day. There's a story they tell about the wedding of the orphan bride in the courtyard. Did the guide tell you that story? How the Ramah performed a wedding on a Friday night to save a orphan bride shame and embarrassment. Did you hear the story, Jack?
There is a tshuva under this.
Remember,
it is indeed. It's in the Tshuvot HaRamah. Kuf Kaf Hey. It is indeed why you can actually perform because of Kavod HaBriot. Thank you, Jean. You can indeed do that. And sometimes if a guide knows, they'll say, this is the courtyard where the Ramah performed because it's only Asur Midrabanan. It's not Asur Midoraita. And Kavod HaBriot, human dignity, can override a rabbinic prohibition. Is that correct, Shmuley?
If you say so.
We study this in one of our shiurim.
What was the question? What was the question with the courtyard? What was the problem? I didn't understand the problem.
Okay, the problem was that there was an orphan bride, and the Nadunya. Okay, if she had no mother and no father, who was going to put up the money so that she could marry. So the relatives put up the money, but it wasn't enough. So when the groom's family came, remember, they didn't meet before the actual wedding. The families, they'd made Tanaim, but the families got together. And before the wedding, the groom's family counted out, okay, the Nadan. It was short. So the groom's family said, no money, no marriage. And they used to marry on Friday afternoons all over Eastern Europe because A, they weren't at work, and B, you could use the Sudat Shabbat or Friday night as the wedding feast, okay? So here we have late Friday afternoon in the winter, and there's a quarrel, and the bride has been prepared, is bedecked, ready to go. But the groom is not coming. The rabbis try to persuade him, we'll fix it up after Shabbat, don't worry. He says no. They call the Ramah. And the Ramah was an amazing man, also a very nice man, very sensitive. And he persuaded the groom's family to agree. But by then, Shabbat had already come in. So it was like a half hour after Set HaKokavim, after the stars had emerged. And the halakha is that you don't do a wedding on Shabbat. Why not?
It's in Beitza.
What?
Masechet Beitza.
Masechet Beitzah is the name of a Masechet. I want the answer to the question.
Because it's
Marcel.
a transaction.
Because, well, the Bavli says in Masechet Beitzah, because you might write.
Yeah.
Those what?
The Ketubah, okay, the Ketubah is written. So it's a bit like Muktzeh. Now, in fact, though, you could actually do a wedding on Shabbat, but we don't because, as I said, there's always a written bit, and writing is asur midoraita. That's a biblical prohibition. So the Ramah said, look, you know what we're going to do? We won't have a Ketubah now, but we're going to go through with the chuppah, so as not to shame the orphan bride. He talks about Gadol, Kavod, Habriot, Brachot, Daf Yud Tet, and this famous tshuva of the Ramah. And he begins his tshuva when he wrote about this by saying, Rinana alai kol ha'ir. The whole city was in an uproar. How could the Ramah have performed a wedding on Shabbat? So I'm going to explain to you why, says the Ramah, and he did. He cites all the sources about Kavod HaBriot and about the fact that Rabbeinu Tam had issued a ruling on this when there was no Peru Revu, and which have in the past, and therefore you can definitely break an Isur, a rabbinical prohibition, to save the shame and embarrassment of somebody who is very vulnerable, okay? The shame and embarrassment of those who are not leaders of society. They are Teflon, they don't care. But people who are not the leaders of society tend to care and can be hurt. And there's nothing worse than standing under the chuppah. Yes, Jean.
And the Ketubah was signed Motzei Shabbos.
It was signed on Motzei Shabbos. Exactly. And the money came. But the Ramah, who was criticized, but he stood his ground, and he puts it in his notes on the Shulchan Aruch, that you can do a wedding on Shabbat, Marcel, if it's for the sake of saving someone's dignity, okay? But you're right, the Mishnah in Beitzah talks about Reshut and Mitzvah and the different classes and the different categories. Exactly. Now, very little to do with Moreh Nevukhim, and I guess as always my time flies by. We are going to get there. Let's have a look at the other protagonist, the Marshal. Rabbi Solomon Luria was also Polish, 1510 to 1573, lived a lot longer, great Ashkenazi poskim, and a Rosh Yeshiva. He eventually took over Rabbi Shachner's yeshiva in Lublin. And his grandmother, by the way, was a Rosh Yeshiva in Padua, Italy. Did you know that? A woman Rosh Yeshiva, Miriam Shapira Luria. Look her up. Miriam Shapira Luria, Marcella, are you nodding because you know of her? You're muted. You're still muted. Okay. Whatever.
Was he a relative of Arizal or not?
No.
No, he was
This-
a relative of Rema.
No, this Luria family traced its descent from Rashi.
Mhm.
Okay, and the grandfather, Rabbi Achiel Luria, his daughter, as I said, was extremely well educated, and he'd only had daughters, and she became a Rosh Yeshiva in Italy, in Padua. Now, but she was very attractive, so she gave her shiurim behind a curtain. There were a couple of others too. There was a Barazani in Kurdistan, who was also like a Rosh Yeshiva, but apparently, but the Moed of Ludmir was a little different. She was not a Rosh Yeshiva. She was simply very holy, and people visited her. But apparently, Barazani did not need a mechitza. So the Marshal was very abrasive, very critical, very strong. He was very domineering. He was Rabbi of Brisk. He was Rabbi of Ostro, but and his style was different. Instead of codifying halakha, he wrote the analysis of the Talmudic sugya, and his famous work is Yam Shel Shlomo. Out of the 16 volumes, we only have 7, and he wrote Chochmat Shlomo, which is a comparison of nuschaot, of text in the Talmud, different Talmuds. He had a huge library, and today the Chochmat Shlomo is printed in every Gemara. You can check on the original text. Okay, that's about enough on the protagonist. Let's read, otherwise we will never get there. I'm going to go into screen share, so we'll go into view. No, we're going to screen share right now. Here we go. All right. Ach emet omar lema'alat Adoni. Now I'm going to give you a précis of most of this stuff, but the tshuva that the Ramah dealt with, an answer was a question relating to kashrus, as is often the case, mundane Jewish law. They found some stony, blistery type abrasions on a lung of an animal after it had been shechted. You have to check the animal and you check the lungs. That's where the concept of glut comes from, and we're not going to explain that now. And what happened was that there was something that was identified by the Talmudic term tinra, okay, which is in Gemara Chulin, and the tinra is defined by Rashi. Now Rashi is not quite clear. There's a complication in the Gemara, but the bottom line is that the Ramah cites Aristotle in his Meteorologica to prove that you can have a substance in the world which begins soft and ends up hard and rock-like. And how does he do it? Aristotle explains that the core of the earth is molten lava. In other words, it's liquid and hot. Yet the rocks, lava rocks that erupt on the face of the earth's surface are rock hard.
Aristotle knew that.
Aristotle knew that. He was a very clever man, and he knew an awful lot of things. Okay, so the Ramah then says, I'm paskening in the light of this theory. Now he has a lot of extra stuff, and he cites Rashi, and their bottom line is that the animal is kosher. But when the Marshal, who was actually at the beginning a colleague and friend of his younger contemporary, the Ramah, he receives this tshuva, and he gets very angry. Line 10, Kibalti ktovcha b'megila afa, tuva panim va'achor. I got your letter about the Tirna, okay? It's written in a flying scroll, which is written on the front and the back. Anybody know where that comes from? Zechariah chapter 5. Va'ashuv va'esa einai V'hinei Megillah afa. A flying scroll. There you are. Prophet Zechariah, look it up. Okay? V'raiti bo dvarim chidudim. V'rgashti ki zmal bevasar. I thought that somebody had pressed a sharp instrument into my flesh. V'hikiftani b'chabilot chochmot v'ruban chitzonot. B'chidim shonot v'apnimiyot agunot. You left the inner core of Jewish law and you went out to who? Aristotle.
Great.
Torah chogeret sakum konenetim naroteha. And the Torah is weeping and mourning. Okay? Ki harut banim uvanot hen hanuzufot umugunot. The true children are now spurned, like Adan Sila in the earlier generations, or Chachmat Aristo Ha'arel, and the uncircumcised Aristotle. Elav ha'ita poneh b'chol pinot, you turn to him. Hariteni michochmat Aristo Ha'arel. I've seen the circumcised Aristo's wisdom. Mitoch ha'idim sheba'aretz v'cholei. Amarti oili she'inai ra'u nosaf lamar she'oznai shamu. Not only have I heard, but I've seen. Shikar hamachmad va'bosem hu divrei tamei. The unclean one is regarded as the sweet-smelling, perfumed one. V'hi b'fi chachmei Yisrael ke'en bosem l'Torah k'dosha. Rachmana litzlan me'avon hagadol. May God save us from the great sin. Etc. He cites the Rosh and other Tshuvot which say that you should stay away from philosophy. Okay? And finally, we're going to read line 19. So, I really am absolutely shocked by what I've read in your Tshuva. Okay. Va'ata, middle of line 19. Ani gever Ra'iti katuv b'tfilot u'sudurei habachurim. I've seen that there are Shiva Bachurim who have in their sidurim tfilat Aristo, Aristotle's prayer. V'zehu ashmat hanasi kemotcha shenosei lahem panim. This is your fault. Okay? Because you mix up Aristotle with the words of God. The best you can do with Aristotle is read it on the toilet. Now he adds a little shtoch. He says, actually, you should have studied grammar, Hebrew grammar, and left philosophy because you can't write grammatically. You have no idea, and you mix up the nocheach with an istar, second person with a third person, unakeva v'zakar. You can't get your genders right. V'yachid v'rabim, you confuse your singular and your plural. You're a real mess when it comes to Hebrew writing and grammar, and yet you spend your time, waste your time, and your students' time on philosophy. Now, Tfilat Aristo is interesting. Have you ever heard of it? Probably not. But it is in fact discussed, or articles on it. The Greeks Aristotle wrote in Greek. Now, there were often Christians who translated from the Greek into the Arabic. So we have a certain Chanin ibn Ishaq, okay, who is called actually in our sources Hanania ben Yitzchak HaNotzri. Hanania ben Yitzchak the Christian. Now he wrote Musarei HaPhilosophim, translated by Yehuda al-Charizi, who also translated the Moreh Nevukhim and the Kuzari, and it has a prayer, okay, and the prayer is Adir Asher Adir V'hamatchil b'kol davar v'kadmon asher osar hatzileni me'eshecha hagdola. There was a legend amongst the Christians that Aristotle recanted from his strictly Aristotelian philosophy, and he actually became a believer in God and would have liked to have changed his writings, but it was too late. And this was taken up by Jewish writers as well, found in Shlomo ibn Gibirol's Tikkun Midot HaNefesh. And if you want to read a piece on it, Maya Lu wrote a book called The Jews of Poland in 1944, and on page 182 to 187, you'll find a discussion of Aristotle's prayer. So actually the prayer is that Aristotle prays and says, I hope that I'll be saved from God's fire in hell, okay? Because although some of the things I wrote were very good, some were not, or I didn't write enough about the spiritual side. But Marshall is shocked that there is a Tfilat Aristo included in a Siddur that Yeshiva Bochrim are carrying around. So, what does the Ramah respond? Tchila ene. So the Ramah begins by saying, okay, and we'll go to line 28. It begins by saying, look, or we've been through this before. During the days of the Cherem, the Rashba, and the Rosh, we know all about that. And the Rashba wrote, line 27, Lo katav sham ela lo osra biyankuto shel adam. Remember, if you're too young, below 25, then you should be reading the Moreh Nevukhim or Aristotle. Kodem shilmad chokhmat haTalmud. Rambam says that you only read philosophy after you filled your stomach with what bread and wine or bread and meat, okay? And the Rambam wrote the Moreh Nevukhim. Now we accept him as the greatest authority in halakha, and we have to rely upon him here. So don't lose your cool, Marshal, says the Ramah. I'm doing a fine job here. But he cites the Rivash, who talks of the fact that problem with the Greeks, but the Rivash's Tuvah actually, okay, the Rivash's Tuvah says that you can certainly read philosophy in order to understand how to deal with people who attack Judaism using Aristotelian philosophy. So it's really on the model of V'da ma shetashiv la epikorus. And anyhow, says the Ramah, v'hashenit. And the second reason, line 39, אף כי אם נאמר שאסרו ללמוד בכל ספריהם גזירה משום דברים אסורים שבהם, כל מקום בספרי חכמינו זל השם ממהם אנו שותים, ובפרט הרב הגדול הרמב"ם, בזה לא עלה על שום דעת לאסור. He says, look, don't go and read Aristotle if you don't want to. But certainly if the Rambam did write and include Aristotle, that's perfectly kosher. Like in the Sefer Bichinat Olam, Rabbi Yedaya HaPanini, remember we cited him last time, Sof davar libi ha'amen ma she'emin sof ha'gaonim, bizmanam of Rosham b'ma'alahu ha'rambam v'chulei. Ha'af ki miktzat ha'chachamim chalku alav v'sarfu sfarav. He mentions the machloket and the burning of the book. Mikol makom, he says on line 2, כבר נתפשטו ספריו בכל החכמים האחרונים ז"ל. The books of the Rambam are now accepted by all the later authorities. And remember, the Ramah says, Hilchata Kebatrai. And today we all read the Rambam in his yeshiva and in his circle. וכולן עושים אותה לראשם מטרה להביא ראיה מתוך דבריו, כהלכה למשה מסיני. And anything the Rambam says is like הלכה למשה מסיני. ולכן אני גם אומר שמנוקה אני מעוון זה. Then he goes on to say, whilst I do cite from Aristotle, okay, I only teach and deal with the Moreh Nevukhim and with Aristotle as he is discussed by the Rambam. And also Shar Sifrei HaTeva, Kishar HaShamayim v'chadomehem. Now he makes an important distinction here. He says, I'm only reading Aristotle in terms of the natural science, physics, biology, chemistry. Okay? So what the Ramah does is he makes a very important move. Aristotle and other Greek philosophers at the time, everything that you would read would go on a natural progression from physical sciences to what we call metaphysics, theology, the study of God. Okay? Now, that link was natural, and nobody would have thought to have broken it. So what Aristotle would be saying, and what the philosophers who followed him in Jewish circles would say, the same intelligence that you use to understand how the world works, use to understand how God works.
Right.
So, very simply, in terms of science, where does thunder come from? What causes thunder?
Electricity.
Thunder, not lightning. Thunder.
Electrostatic charges on the clouds.
Isn't it?
Clouds, thank you. Clouds.
Yeah, but electric,
Thunder.
yeah.
Thunder. Clouds.
Electrostatic charges.
Electric
Thank you.
charges in the clouds. But
Thank you.
basically it's clouds.
Thank you, Marcel.
Thank you, Marcel. It's basically clouds. Now, who wrote a play called Clouds? Which Greek writer? Famous comedy, actually. Aristophanes wrote The Clouds. Remember, Jean?
That's what I was going to say.
Correct?
I heard, yes.
And what is The Clouds about? Why is it a comedy? Because what Aristophanes does, he gets this regular Greek pagan who believes in the gods. So Zeus creates thunder, correct? And then the hero, Aristophanes, tells this simple Greek, well, actually it's clouds. And then he says, well, what causes lightning? So the simple Greek says, our lightning is another god and a goddess. And each time, and as Aristophanes has the chorus telling him what the truth is. And each time he says, my word, I never knew that. Isn't that amazing? So what the Greeks did, Aristotle, Plato, and all the rest, they took the intelligence that was revealing the secrets of nature in a rational way straight into the field of understanding God. So God can't be corporeal, and he doesn't intervene in the world, because the same philosophical intelligence you use to discover the true origin of thunder and lightning and storms, you also use to understand God. Ramah is breaking this link, and he says, actually, we only delve into Greeks and philosophy and secular works when we want to understand the workings of nature. When it comes to God, well, then we have to follow Chazal, okay? Now, there are places where Aristotelian philosophy does coincide with Chazal, but that's what the Rambam said. Nothing I say, says Maimonides in the Guide of the Perplexed, is not to be found in Chazal, in Midrash, in Gemara, in Tanakh. Okay? But when it comes to science, we certainly believe. And we believe the Greeks when it comes to astronomy as well. When they tell us about Ptolemy, okay, then we have to incorporate that, because this is how the intelligence sees the way the world works. Later on, of course, it'll be Kepler, and then it'll be Kepler, and then Copernicus, and Tycho Brahe. But whatever it is, Ramah is a pioneer in breaking this link. And that's much of what he says. Now, the next thing to say is on line 18, which is cute. He says, look, as I said, I only follow Aristotle when it comes to the way the world works rationally, and those bits of Aristotle that fit in with Chazal, and they're all found in Rambam's Moreh Nevukhim. Moreover, he says, Umikol Makom, Omar Shesade Sadi Bimromim, I have a witness on high, Shekol Yamai Lo Asakti Bazo Rak B'Shabbat V'Yom Tov V'Chol HaMoed. I only studied science and philosophy on Shabbat, Yom Tov, and Chol HaMoed, V'Shar Shebri Adam Holchim L'Tayel, during the Spazieren hour, when all the Jews are going out for walks in the park. I was using that time for studying my science and my philosophy. כל ימות החול אני עוסק כפי מיעוט השגתי במשנה ובתלמוד ובפוסקים ובפירושיהם. The rest of the week, I deal with Shas and poskim. ומה שכתב לי אדוני ששגגתי באיזו מילות ודקדוק כאשר העלה אמר על הספר. And now you're shtoch about the fact that my grammar is pretty weak. Omar eineni mikat hamadabrim balei halashon. I have to say I'm not particularly articulate. Okay, ki anochi nizhar b'inyan ha'mechuvan v'lo b'milot. I go for the intention and not the words. I don't look for flowery speech. I'm not a great wordsmith, but I do try and get the content right. She'no ma'ala v'lo morid li dandina. And the way you say it doesn't affect whether it's right or wrong. And then he also talks about how fast he thinks. And he doesn't have a secretary, so he can't have it put down and copied, and he doesn't go over it. And therefore, you've got to give me on that. By the way, going back to line 13, he says, Ach Omar Shani im evrach yoter milasok Kabbalah. He points out that actually, you do a lot of Kabbalah in your yeshiva in Lublin. Jews of Poland were notorious for their Kabbalism, as we do read. If you read an Isaac Bashevis Zinger book, you'll understand how deeply mired they were in superstition and in all sorts of emunot tefillot. But he says, I think it's actually much more dangerous than Aristotelian philosophy, okay? Because when we say line 13, כי יותר יש לחוש שלא ייתה, כמבואר לאדוני ממה שכתב הרמב"ן, בהקדמתו פירוש לתורה. Okay? Ramban, who was a Kabbalist and who brought Kabbalah into his Perush LaChumash, warns in his introduction about the dangers of misinterpretation unless you have a teacher who teaches you the tradition. So now we will go back to where we were reading, okay, which is on page 3. And I want to read from, and he's back onto the Kabbalah. He says, look, every Tom, Dick, and Harry, or every Chaim, Yankel, and Herschel, kofetz lilmod inyan ha-Kabbalah.
Where are you? What line?
Top line on page 3. Rushes to learn Kabbalah. Ki hi ta'ava la'inayim. It seems very attractive. Ubeprat b'dorei ha'achronim, especially in the recent generations, shegilu divreihem b'sefer b'beyur, when we have specific books. Now, this may be a hint at the debate that took place as to the author of the Zohar. Was it Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai? Was it Rabbi Moshe Di Leon? Okay, we only have written Kabbalistic works widely spread in the 13th century after the Ramban. But the belief is that there was a mystical tradition, but it was a purely oral one. So the Ramah expresses his dislike here of people who jump into Kabbalah. And you've got the Zohar that's printed and available today. Hadn't happened before. And was it in fact the original? Has anything to do with Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai? Vaharekanat, and of course the Rekanati. V'share orah shekol mayan mitbonen bahem ha'kol hu mevoar ledat hamayen bahem af al pi shadvarim einan muvanim al pi ha'emet. Everybody thinks they understand, but of course they don't. Me'achar she'en mukubal mipi mukubal. They have no teacher who passes on the proper tradition. Ubalei batim she'enan yodim ben yeminan u'smola. And regular balabatim who can't distinguish between their left and their light and their right, they're wandering around in a darkness. They can't even read a Sedra with Perush Rashi. They're all learning Kabbalah, or they're all doing Gula. They all know about Gula, Kabbalah. They know nothing, says the Ramah. וכל זה גורם להם שהדור יתום בעוונות נתמעט כל כך, She'istara bilgena kish kish karya. You know what that means?
Alright.
It's a line from the Gemara, but istara is a coin, okay? A small coin. Bilgena, in an empty pitcher, in an empty jug, kish kish karya, makes a lot of noise. Kish kish is
Knocking,
onomatopoeia.
Yeah.
In other words, when you have an empty vessels make a lot of noise. It's like throwing one coin, small coin, into a china or into a porcelain vase. If you shake it around, it'll make a lot of noise. Whereas if you have a vase that's full of coins, because you have a person who has a tremendous amount of knowledge, then when you throw in the coin, it won't shake around because there's a lot there. So he says these are all empty vessels. These people who jump to Kabbalah, they can't even explain a parsha with Perush Rashi. So you got to have a sense of proportion here. So a part of his defense of philosophy is to say what you, Marshall, and your colleagues are doing in the yeshivas of Poland is not such a bright idea because you're teaching them Kabbalah. They're all reading the Zohar and Kabbalistic texts, and they don't know what they're talking about. Whoever has seen a little Zohar immediately becomes an expert, but Doresh Barabim starts giving great speeches and holding Shiurim, and in the end they'll have to pay for that. The true ones who understand Kabbalah realize that people who are not qualified and are not trained and don't have a proper teacher, all that they will get out of Kabbalah is damage. And he says, you know what? I don't answer questions about Kabbalah because I'm not sure that I have the right tradition either. We should serve God in a simple way and not mixing Kabbalah. And in that, he goes back to the Rivash. In fact, on page 2, line 32, Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Sheshet, 15th century France, and then Algiers, writes about the study of Kabbalah. He says here's a tradition from the Balei Tosafot that Ani mitpalel adat ze hatinok, line 34. I daven like a baby, like an innocent child. Klomar lotzi milev hamekubalim, not like the Kabbalists who get caught up in their shemot, in the names of God, different names, different qualities, different characteristics, and they don't know what they're doing, and all they do is they fool themselves. V'chen hoda'ati chama shamali biyichud mori harav Rabbeinu Nissim Ran. The Ran, okay, Rabbeinu Nissim, who taught the Rivash, ki harbe yoter midai taka atzmo haramban zal lahamin binyan HaKabbalah. Ran criticized Ramban, who was a relative, about too much Kabbalah in his commentary on the Torah. על סודות הרמב"ן ז"ל, וגם הם אינם מגלים שורשי החוכמה, הם מגלים טפח ומכסים כמה טפחים. ולכן בחרתי לבד יהיה לעסק בנסתרות. I do not involve myself in the secret matters. So this is the Ramah. So he defends himself along various lines. He says your precedents from the past, the Charamim against the Rambam, were only on Aristotelian philosophy, and also a certain age. B, I only follow how the Rambam uses Aristotle, and it would be silly to deny the science. So I say the science, but not all the metaphysics, not about God. The bits about God that Aristotle got right, the Rambam tells us. So I follow the Rambam, I'm perfectly kosher. And anyhow, you are off the rails a bit by your teaching Kabbalah and making it so popular. And finally, don't insult me with my lack of grammar. Unfortunately, I didn't have a good teacher, but still you have to understand that what I'm saying is right, whether it's expressed in elegant Hebrew and whether I mix up my genders or I do not. Okay? I just slip in that Rabbi Moshe Feinstein's Hebrew is shocking. His grammar is terrible, but nobody would deny the fact that he was an outstanding posek and allowed North American Jewry, orthodoxy, to flourish, as it were, in the modern world. Okay? And We just have to make an effort. Jean.
First, a little remark. We speak always about Yeridat Hadorot, but I see that the Balabait from the 16th century did not know more than our Balei Batim today.
Absolutely.
Following, I was always struck by the fact that all the tshuvot from the 16th century until today are written systematically. Zachar becomes Nekeva and Nekeva becomes Zachar. It's systematic. I think that I thought once, even in Rambam, but this is exceptional. But all the tshuvot from this time, I see that the Marshal is the only one who was medagdek. How do you explain that? It's systematic, the contrary.
Well, perhaps they were Galicianas. Who is he? Okay. And I'm not sure it is system. I think that they were doing a lot of citing from memory. I think they just didn't pay any attention. In other words, what is systematic isn't the grammar, it's the fact that they did not pay attention to the grammar, and they possibly did not want to write too many he's because it was a hey and a yud, so rather write a hey and a vav. I don't know. But what I do know is that any Israeli, and I've had a lot of students in law school who read the tshuva, cannot understand it because they say this is not Hebrew. And they're quite right. It's not Hebrew, and there are many mistakes, but they just did not pay attention. I'm not sure it's a system, but it's something to be looked into. But the Ramah admits, as you saw, that he didn't have a system. He just got it wrong because his grammar was very weak. Okay? But he does claim, and the Balei, if you read the Tosfos as well, it's very difficult to understand from a linguistic perspective, but you learn very early on when you do Gemara, Rashi, and Tosafot, not to look at the words and expect them to be clear, but to try and find out the ideas behind the words. And it's a style then of the Balei Tosafot and of the Chidushim that you're really focusing on the concepts and not on the language. Okay, so let's have a look at number 6. What does the Ramah have to say here? Okay. וכן אומר שדברי חכמינו ז"ל כולם בנויים על סל החוכמה האמיתית, והם בדבריהם נפתל ועיקש, נפתולי אחותי נפתלתי, the name Naphtali in this week's parsha, אף על פי שלפעמים נראה לי לפי תחילת המחשבה שהם מסכימים לדברי החכמים הבאים על צד המופת, בפרט בעניין התכונה. Now this is the Ramah's hobby horse. He says, you know what? I want to defend the faith. Often we seem to read that the Chachamim got their science wrong. Gemara Psakim is a famous sugya about what goes around what. And he says, especially in astronomy, which he knew, if you look at the Gemara and look at the Rishonim, they didn't get their astronomy right. וישמחו מקצת החכמים את עצמם במה שאמרו, ניצחו חכמי האומות חכמי ישראל. That's the Gemara, okay? That we have to admit, and even the Chachmei Gemara admit, that often the Gentiles got it right in terms of astronomy. וגם בדברי הרב המורה שכתב שעניין התכונה לא הייתה נשלמת בזמן הנביאים והחכמים הראשונים. Rambam writes in the Moreh Nevukhim, we can't expect the rabbis to be scientists, perfect scientists, because they're the scientists of their times, and they make the mistakes of the age in which they lived. Now, of course, we are shocked in Poland in the 16th century if we allow ourselves to think that Chazal got it wrong. But you don't need to think so. But if you are very careful in analyzing what Chazal have said, you'll understand that actually they did know the truth, okay? It just didn't come out in particular places here and there. It's a bit like what the Rambam, Maimonides in the Moreh, does all the time. If you look at the Torah and Chazal carefully, you'll see that it fits in with the best of newfangled Aristotelian philosophy, astronomy, science and mathematics. You just have to look for it. כבר כתבתי על זה בפירוש המגילה שלי, שאין דעתם לומר שחזרו בין חכמי ישראל, רק, so what does it mean when the Gemara says, but the Gentile scholars got it right? רק שבסיבות הגלות נשכח מהן אותו דרך. We, rabbis, forgot the truth when we had to go into galut, and we are persecuted, and we are pursued from pillar to post, so we forgot lots of our past learning. ולא ידעו לכוון כל דרכי התכונה על פי התכונה ההיא, והוצרכו ללמוד על פי תכונת הגויים. So we need to relearn our ancient truths from non-Jews. So I wrote a commentary on Feuerbach because Feuerbach got the truth, but it was originally our truth, but we'd forgotten it. So now I have to teach the Jews the truth, which was our truth. וזה עניין הודעה, כמו שהוכחתי כל זה בספרים בראיות ברורות. ולא רק שאין יתרון לחכמי האומות וחכמי ישראל, אלא באמת. Now he goes even further. כל חוכמת הפילוסופים, 921, והחוקרים בא להם מישראל. We had it originally. וכל חוכמתן כלול בתורה. All of their wisdom is in the Torah. כמו שהעריך הרב המורה, as the Rambam wrote in Moreh Nevukhim. להורות שכל חוכמת הפילוסופים נמצא במדרשי חז"ל ואגדותיהם. We know that, we've read that. Rambam says everything that's good about Aristotle is in somewhere in the Torah, Tanakh, Midrash, Gemara, or Chazal. ודע, כי ראיתי בספר אחד ישן מאוד, I read an old book, והיו מציירים בו כל הפילוסופים בצורתם וחוכמתם, איך המציאו. It talks about all the Greek philosophers. היה כתוב בו, and what did I discover there? שסוקרט, שהוא שקראו הפילוסופים סוקרט, האלוהי, להיותו שהוא המציא בראשונה בפילוסופיה, שיש נמצא נבדל. He was the first Greek philosopher to go into theology and talk about the unmoved mover, okay? ואחריו נמשכו הפילוסופים האחרים, וכתב שם שהוא קיבל החכם חוכמה מאסף ומאחיתופל. Where did Aristotle learn his theology from? Achitophel, the counselor of King David, and Asaf, מזמור לאסף. ועוד כתוב בשבילי האמונה. Now Rabbi Meir Adarbi was the son-in-law of the Rosh, wrote a book called Shvilei HaEmunah, deals with astronomy and deals with theology. כל עיקר חוכמת אריסטוטלית גנובה מחוכמת שלמה עליו השלום. Everything that Aristotle wrote was actually stolen from King Solomon, who was the wisest of all men, of course. And how does he know? כי כאשר כבש אלכסנדרוס מוקדון ירושלים, Alexander the Great, who was his tutor? Who was Alexander the Great's tutor? Aristotle. Aristotle was hired by the Macedonian King Philip to teach Alexander. We're not sure how good a student Alexander was, but he conquered the whole known world by the time he was 33. So he was probably better at war than he was at thought. But nevertheless, he was his tutor. And when Alexander came back from conquering the world, remember he'd gotten to Jerusalem. Remember the meeting with Shimon HaTzadik about, staying in the temple, because that year all Jewish children were called Alexander. Alexander, not Sasha, then he said, Alexander. So what Shimon HaTzadik said was, what's better for you to assure your future fame? Living children passing on your name or statues? Lead the temple, don't put a statue in, we'll call every single Jewish child born this year Alexander. That's why we have Alexander Chasidim. And if you believe that, you'll believe anything. Shishlit Aristotelus Rabo Alotzar Sifrei Shlomo. So what did Alexander discover in Jerusalem? Shlomo's library. V'chol davar tov shematza behen, sham shmo alav. So Aristotle took Shlomo's book of wisdom and stuck his name on it. But he did put in some bad ideas, כמו קדמת העולם, like the eternity of the universe, וכפירת השגחה, denial of השגחה, כדי לחפות עליו, שלא ידעו הבריות שבאו אחריו, שגנב החוכמה מהיהודים. That was in order to make sure that the forgery would be convincing, and that he wouldn't discover that the whole thing was taken from the Jews. ובאמת, שכל בר ישראל ראוי להאמין אמונה זו, לא לתת תהילתנו ותפארתנו זרים חכמי העמים. Okay, so this is not an unusual move, but the Ramah was a pioneer. Now, these ideas had been around, they were very obscure, but Ramah puts them in the corner center of Jewish hashkafa. Yes, we do study Moreh Nevukhim. Yes, we do study Aristotle. Yes, we believe in physical sciences. When it comes to the theology, there we say we only believe the bits that are good, that correspond to our principles of faith. We have Rambam as our guide, okay? And this was new. And the Maharal of Prague takes this a step further. And today what we have are brilliant Jewish scientists of the Orthodox persuasion, who are totally rational when it comes to their physics, chemistry, neuroscience, whatever it is. When it comes to their religion, though, they are tamimim. They will not apply any of the sophisticated theology or critique of religion to their Yiddishkeit. It is straight as it came out with their mother's milk. Now, that would not have existed before the period of the Ramah. As we know from all the figures we studied in the debate about Maimonides, all of the Ibn Tibbons, Yedaya HaPanini, they all believed in Aristotle in terms of describing God and what you should believe in and what makes a refined religion as opposed to a primitive and unsophisticated one. But that link was broken, first by the Ramah and later on by the Maharal. Of course, we have people who come back and want to bring the spirit of Maimonides into Jewish theology and belief and critique perhaps the superstitions, the unrefined aspects of Jewish thought. But it means that Kabbalists can actually study Moreh Nevukhim. And this is the last section, which is just as good. We have 2 more minutes. Line 31. This is again the Ramah from the Torat HaOlah, where he deals with philosophy and theology and Kabbalah. כי לפי מה שהתבאר ידוע כי דרכי הקבלה הן בעצמם דרכי הפילוסופים האמיתיים המאמינים. Kabbalah is the same as the true philosophers who believe in God. וכמו כל מה שחקרו והוציאו הפילוסופים בעיוניהם המופתיים, and all that the philosophers proved through logic and rationality, קיבלו חכמי ישראל עניינים אלה בקבלה בעניין הספירות. The spheres, for example, we have had that in our tradition from time immemorial. ונתווספו בעלי הקבלה מבעלי החקירה בזה שהם קיבלו האמת כאשר הוא, ויודעים דברים שלא עמדו עליו הפילוסופים בחקירתם. And our Kabbalah has got more than the philosophers. Okay? As Shakespeare says in Hamlet, "O Horatio, there is more."
There's more to heaven than men know.
Than you imagined in all your philosophy. Okay? You imagine everything, but there's much more than that in real life. Okay? So this is what we're saying. Shem biyad Yisrael mekubalim Moshe Rabbeinu alav hashalom. Kefia shekiblu min hanuvuah shehi lama'ala min hachakira. Prophecy, of course, is higher than philosophy. So what we are actually arriving at is that, as I said last time, and here we're going to finish the debate over philosophy and the Moreh Nevukhim, and next week we'll only have time for 4 or 5 shiurim before I go to New York. So we will talk about the Rambam's theory of reasons for the commandments. Commandments themselves will have to leave, possibly for another time, possibly not. But what you can do today is you can study Moreh Nevukhim in a yeshiva, okay? In an enlightened yeshiva, say in the Gush, okay? You can study it in the Orthodox style. You can admit the influence of Aristotle, of his student Alexander, of Aphrodisias, and you can study it as a text, and you can understand, historically speaking, this is what the Rambam was saying, this is what he is prepared to say. Or you can go to a Yeshivat HaMekubalim in the Old City, and you can study the same Moreh Nevukhim there with a complete Kabbalistic take. It's all to do with the Kabbalah. You never knew. Or three, you can go to the university. You can study the Moreh Nevukhim, and then you look at Ibn Rushd and Ibn Sind, as we've said, Averroes and Avicenna. You'll look at the historical development, and finally, you can go to a theological seminary, and you can wonder about how the Rambam's openness to the concept of God written in the works of the Greeks is important to refine our theology today. It may put you in the camp of the anti-mystics, or those who insist upon rationalism, okay? And here I'm going to throw in the Gaon of Vilna, okay? That do not confuse Jewish spirituality with all of the excessive baggage of superstition and, what's most important, idolatry, in the sense that people are actually not understanding what they're doing. They kiss mezuzot because they think the mezuzot will protect their lives. That is, in fact, what the Rambam was trying to fight. So we have a number of options, and I think I can finish to stop the share screen. We'll stop the share. And, okay, questions, comments?
It's a little bit exaggerated to say that the study of the comment on dit, the Sfirot and the Moreh Nevukhim are together. That seems a little bit.
But you are not a Kabbalist. If you're a Kabbalist, you are not a Mekubal. If you were a Kabbalist, you'd say,
of course,
wonderful stuff. Aristotle's spheres, Sfirot of the Kabbalah, it's all the same. Why not? You're too rational, right?
No.
But it could be,
and
if you wanted it to be. Im tirtzeh en zo agada.
And finally,
Yeah.
once that Newton came, all the proofs of the Rambam about the two first mitzvot fall apart.
They do indeed. But Newton is not until the 17th century.
Well, yes.
So that's why we didn't read that bit of the Rambam, because it is heavily out of date.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea is always important. The idea is that you can use the best of the science, philosophy, rational thought of your time in order to defend Judaism. That's the important thing, not the details. The details are clearly arcane. We don't need them anymore. It belongs to the past, unless you are a historian of Greek thought and of medieval thought. It's interesting to look at David Nieto, who was actually a rabbi living in Newtonian England. And if you read his works, you'll see that he actually grapples with Newton. And for that, he got into a lot of trouble with the Mahamad of the Spanish Portuguese, precisely for that. Thank you as always, Jean, for pointing out interesting
To
things.
save him.
Good.
Saved him.
And I mean, if you mention the Chacham Tzvi, he did save him. Chacham Tzvi was a rationalist. He was a great learner of the Moreh Nevukhim, and he got into trouble with Rabbi Yonatan Eibeshitz very early on, the case of the heartless chicken, the chicken without the heart. So here again you have Chacham Tzvi saying, I'm a rationalist. There was a chicken, and as we began with the Tirna, we end with the laws of kashrut. A young girl was helping a mother set up for Shabbat chicken soup. And when they shechted the chicken, or they brought the shechted chicken home, they couldn't find the heart. And if you don't have all the organs intact, then the assumption is that it's treif. So the mother thought that the girl had thrown the heart to the cat. Normally the spleen was given to the cat, too much blood. But the young girl made a mistake and she threw the heart to the cat. That's why there was no heart. The Chaim said it clearly it had a heart. It's not Natul Lev. It was perfectly kosher. It was a great chicken. It was squawking and running around and laying eggs. So of course, that you cannot possibly rationally believe that a chicken can be alive without a heart. So the chicken is kosher. But the Bachur Yeshiva said no. Shulchan Aruch says Natul Lev, no heart, it's treif. So this developed into a huge debate. And Rabbi Yonatan Eibeshitz, who was at the time great scholar in Prague, said something interesting. He said, look, you say in order to live, you have to have a heart. But perhaps your life could come from a different organ that we haven't discovered yet. And now he said he wrote to the scientists at the University of Halle in Germany. He said, is it possible that you could have Marcel life, a breath, and not have a heart? And they said, well, we can't say no, because this is the beginning of scientific relativism, okay? The 17th century. We don't know. I mean, once we believed in phlogiston, okay? That the reason why you could burn things, because there's something in the air called phlogiston. Once the Greeks believed in innate heat, and your heart was there to cool, you had to breathe in to cool down the heat of the heart, like you need to cool down a car engine. William Harvey came along in 1628. He published his work on the circulation, which tells us that the heart is, that we breathe not in order to cool down the heart, but in order to exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide at the alveoli in the lungs. So science changes. So Rabbi Eibeshitz said, I wouldn't be so quick to say, rationally speaking, it must have had a heart. Perhaps this is the one chicken in the world that didn't have a heart, and therefore it is technically treif. But it could have squawked and laid eggs and run around because it had life from a different source. Now, the Chacham Shvi suffered as a result of this. His reputation was tarnished because Eibeshitz was a great Talmid Chacham and an author on the very important, on the Urim and Tumim, on the Torah. And eventually he left, Chacham Shvi left Ahu, Altona, Hamburg, and Wandsbek, and he went to Amsterdam to head the Sephardi community. Eibeshitz eventually became the rabbi of the three important communities of Ahu, Altona, Hamburg, and Wandsbek. And Yaakov Emden, who was the son of Chacham Tzvi, Ashkenazi, said that you, Eibeshitz, made my father ill, caused him to fall into a depression over the heartless chicken, psak, and I blame you for that, and therefore I am gonna attack you without mercy over the charge of shabtaut, of being a crypto-Sabbatean. And so there may be a personal element involved in the animosity that that Emden had for Eibeshitz. I don't know whether you knew that, Jean, but there is a history there. And if you read his Emden's autobiography, you'll see he felt very keenly for his father being put down by Rabbi Eibeshitz on a matter of psak halacha. And that, of course, erupted later on into that highly acrimonious debate. So here again, we go from a psak halacha on kashrus to matters of philosophy and theology. But scientific relativism is beginning to kick in here. Okay, so even in terms of what the Ramah said about cutting the umbilical cord between physics and metaphysics, we have a new era opening, which science is going to become relativistic, and that in a way lets Kabbalah in, because Kabbalah, although it seems to be on the face of it highly irrational, or perhaps actually, does work. Our science is not that steady and secure either. In any case, there are many interesting things to say, and we don't have the time to say them, but we will move on. We'll go back to the Moreh Nevukhim until the end of our session, and we'll look at Tamei Mitzvot and some of the Rambam's very original ideas about where the mitzvahs came from. And then, of course, you'll have to ask yourself the question of why you are keeping them. all of that next week, same time, same place. Apparently, there are people who like listening to the recordings. So we are, in fact, not alone. There are people who are going to listen to the recordings, but it's easy for them. It's not that late at night. Although in Switzerland, of course, it starts at 8:15. In Israel, it starts at 9:15. So, it gets a little bit tight at night. In the meantime, we're back to the real world. So, Besorot Tovot, Yeshuot, V'nechamot, and may we all have an optimal result to the decisions that are being made. And I always these days say the line in the Tfilah L'Shlom HaMedina, V'taknein be'etzah tova milfanecha, with great kavanah.
Indeed.
Amen. Amen.
Amen.
Yeah.
Bye for now.